We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance and salute to the New Mexico flag in English and Spanish, as well as the acknowledgement of tribal land. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo la bandera del Estado de Nuevo Mexico, el símbolo Zia de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas. We acknowledge that our Board of Education meeting is taking place on occupied Indigenous land. We acknowledge the Tesuque Pueblo lands and other tribal lands on which we stand. We honor these people, past, present, and future. We acknowledge the history and ongoing colonization of where we are sitting right now in New Mexico and in our country, our own place in the story of colonization. Thank you. We move on to approval of the agenda. Superintendent, do we need any changes?
There are no changes. Thank you, President.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Board Member Abeyta. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed or otherwise? Okay, moving on to Roman numeral 2, executive session. Dr. Gonzalez, do you want to take us in?
Yes, I'd like to move us into executive session where we're discussing threatened or pending litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, Amanda Chavez versus Santa Fe Public Schools and Hilario Chavez, D-101-CV-2025-01983. Threatened or pending litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, Hilario Chavez versus Santa Fe Public School Board of Education et al. 125-CV-00729-SCY-LF. And threatened litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, threatened litigation that the district is considering initiating.
I'll second. There's a second. Okay, thank you. Vice President Bozay. All those in favor of going into executive session? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or otherwise? We will be in executive session until we're not anymore. Okay, coming back from executive session, Dr. Gonzalez.
Okay, I'd like to move us out of executive session where we discuss threatened or pending litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, Amanda Chavez versus Santa Fe Public Schools and Eladio Chavez. D-101-CV-2025-01983. Threatened or pending litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, Eladio Chavez versus Santa Fe Public Schools Board of Education et al. 125-CV-00729-SCY-LF. And threatened litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, threatened litigation that the district is considering initiating. No action was taken.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise?
Abstain.
Okay, we're back from executive session. Moving on to Roman numeral 3, our action items. I guess I got to do this now, Dr. Gonzalez. Action item 8, threatened or pending litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, Amanda Chavez versus SFPS and Eladio Chavez, D-101-CV-2025-01983. Authorize the legal counsel to proceed as discussed in executive session regarding litigation. I'll go ahead and make a motion to authorize legal counsel to proceed as discussed in executive session regarding litigation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise?
I abstain.
We have one abstention. Action item B, threatened or pending litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, Eladio Chavez versus SFPS BOE et al. 1:25 CV-00729-SCY-LF, authorizing legal counsel to proceed as discussed in the executive session regarding litigation. I'll go ahead and make a motion to authorize legal counsel to proceed as discussed in executive session regarding litigation. Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed or otherwise?
I abstain.
One abstention. Action item C, threatened litigation, NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H7, threatened litigation that the district is considering initiating, authorizing the legal counsel to proceed as discussed in the executive session regarding threatened litigation. I'll go ahead and make a motion again to authorize the legal counsel to proceed as discussed in the executive session regarding threatened litigation.
I'll second.
Thank you, Vice President Bozé. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise?
I abstain.
And an abstention. We are now on to our consent agenda. Contracts over $60,000 and the minutes of the January 21st joint study session, as well as the January 22nd standalone executive session and the January 29th study session. Any questions, comments on the consent agenda? Otherwise, is there a motion?
Board President Noble, I move approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Thank you, Vice President Bozé, Secretary Gonzalez. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or otherwise? We have approved the consent agenda. Moving on to Roman numeral 4, Finance Subcommittee presentation and discussion. We have an overview and review of our FY26 budget and a preview and timeline for our FY27 budget. Superintendent.
Thank you, Board President, board members. Tonight we have Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Halford, getting ready to share a presentation with us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Griffin, members of the board. I also want to acknowledge the help that I received from my cabinet teammates in putting this together, and Joe, who's going to be driving and hopefully not leaving us on slides too long. Okay. So the first one lays out all the objectives that we're trying to accomplish with this presentation. First is to understand all the key terms that not only you'll hear throughout this presentation, but probably for the next couple months, and in some cases for as long as you're on the board. The second one is the understanding the budget process from the state appropriation to when it's finally approved by PD. A review of our current budget, projected budget with declining enrollment, some things that it's still early in the process, but there's some things we kind of see coming with the new budget, so we wanted to bring those to your attention, start the discussion. The timeline, so you'll know exactly when things will happen and when it'll all be wrapped up. And finally, I'll turn it over to Dr. Griffin to go over some key budget priorities. Okay, probably the first and foremost term that you'll hear often is the SEG. That's the acronym for State Equalization Guarantee. It's also, you'll also hear the term funding formula, and if you'll notice, I put a copy of, it's also 910B5, which is the official name of the form that PD, like the IRS, they have a name for every form that they have. So 910B5, SEG, funding formula, all the same things. A program unit is what this funding formula will convert student counts into. It all starts with student enrollment, and then it goes through a series of these factors, these multipliers. And just to give you a sense of how much that multiplier works, last year, the one that we have for this year's funding started with 10,300 students, and the final program unit was 11,732. So it more than doubled once it goes through all this. The unit value is the dollar value that PD assigns to each program unit. That's basically how we come up with our final allocation. It takes the program units of our district, multiplies it by the unit value, and that'll give us our final funded amount. The unit value is typically released at the spring budget workshop, so we're not quite sure what it'll be as of yet. At-risk index is an important multiplier. That's one that gives us additional funding to support our students who are deemed at risk. It did go through a slight increase a couple years ago in response to the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, one of many things that changed as a result of that. Bilingual multicultural education programs, we usually just refer to this as bilingual units. That's one of the multipliers that for our ELL or English language learner students. And finally, the TCI, which is a teacher cost index. And the idea behind that is if the makeup of our teachers is, it kind of helps to increase the funding if we have a lot of teachers at higher level licensure or experience or education. For those that have been here for a while, it used to be the T&E index, but the only change to that is they've incorporated the licensure levels, which is one of the missing elements from the old T&E index. Some more key terms. You'll hear operating budget, and by that we mean the entire budget that you have some sort of control or authority over. That's broken up into four budget groups, if you will. The operational is largest. That's the one that is mostly funded with SEG. That's the one that SEG goes into. It's also the most non-categorical, so it's kind of the catch-all. Like if transportation or other fund is over at the end of the year, we could move expenditures from that fund into this one. And same thing if PD deems an expenditure unallowable for a grant, it gets moved to the operational. Athletic and activity funds are mostly self-generated through gate receipts, fundraisers. A lot of them are at the school level. They're the only fund that allows for food or gifts or for a certain amount, obviously, but not something that the operational fund can't pick up. Special revenue is, has quite a few funds in there, ranging from grants, whether they're local, federal, state grants. There's also the transportation fund for the to and from transportation students, and the USDA, or food services. Of all the funds, these are the most categorical. You have to spend it for either what the law allows or what the application was. And finally, the capital outlay is for the larger purchases, the land or building, equipment, maintenance of that equipment. There is one fund that allows for salaries and benefits, but it's only a small portion of that. So in general, it's for the land, equipment, and building. So how school budgeting works in New Mexico. It all starts with, of course, the state, which wrapped up their session today. Within HB2 would be an allocation to PD, and of that allocation, they'll decide, sometimes it'll have very specific initiatives that they want PD to carry out. They also retain a portion for their own operating costs, and then they'll decide how much of that will go into the actual funding formula to flow to the school districts. PD will, like I said, take their allocation, set the unit value, goes through the funding formula, and then once we start building the budget, before we know what it actually will be, but that final number will let us know how much wiggle room, or what, how much we have to cut, or we could work with as far as expanding programs or what. And finally, once it's all said and done, we'll send it up to PD for review and approval. Some years they have some conditions, some codicils on there that we have to meet in order for them to provide that approval. There doesn't seem to be as many this year, but you never know with them. But whatever it is, they'll review it, they'll approve it, and then once they do, we could, it'll be ready to use come July 1st. So one thing that makes the state unique is that the state actually is the main source of funding. Some states, it's property taxes, and if you live in a poor district, then it's unfortunate, but that's where the term equalization comes from. It's a formula that, regardless of where you live, what socioeconomic area you're at, you're going to have the same formula applied to your school and the funding than any other school. And this next slide, the step 2, I think gives a good illustration of what the funding formula does. It all starts with the students who get converted to program units, the unit value is applied, and then our final funding is determined. It also lists a couple of the weights included. The biggest, one of the biggest ones is special education. They also have different levels of need in that category. English learners, at-risk students, and then money to help us support our unique staffing makeup. So the next step gives a timeline. A lot of it starts early on. Right now, we're about halfway through that second box. Legislature just wrapped up, but we haven't gotten the state the unit value yet. So we're about halfway through that box. Next week, we'll start meeting with all the schools individually. We'll meet with them with projected funding. We'll have a lot of my colleagues around the table to give their input on each of the needs of that specific school. We also give them a little allocation that they could use for, we call it their discretionary budget. They could either for supplies or professional development, or in some cases, if they want another half FTE here or there, But that process all starts next week. Then we come back with the departments who we look at their needs, and that's where a lot of your wishes and initiatives will be taken into consideration. We'll assign it to whatever department will handle that, and we'll see how we could best work that into the budget and come up with some numbers on that. In May or June, we haven't received our actual deadline from when the budget will be due to PD. They typically put the larger districts later on, so hopefully, I think last year it was at the end of May, so hopefully they stay true to that, and we have a little bit more time to work on it. It has to be approved by PD with all the signatures by, I believe it's June 20th. So sometime before then, well, before we submit it, we intend on submitting the budget by May 15th. So before then, we'll have that final meeting, and if everything looks good, and we'll get the signature pages from you, send them to PD, and they'll do their review and approval. Next slide gives a brief outline of where our funding is usually used. I think these numbers have been pretty consistent. Salaries have typically been 80 to 90%. I just checked for this year, it's about 81%. We also have student programs and support services, our insurances, our utilities, everything it costs to operate the district. The state oversight, I kind of mentioned some of the reviews that they'll do for the particular budget, but really their oversight continues throughout the year. We have to send them quarterly reports, and there's probably more that our federal programs require as well. And any budget adjustment that comes after we've worked it into our operating budget will be added through a budget adjustment request, which you'll see. So really the goal is to get as much of it into the original budget, or the uploaded budget, so that we have budget starting July 1st, because otherwise, it could be delayed a month or so by the time we get all the approvals and everything in place. The next slide, this is a look at what our expenditures were based on our second quarter submission. And what I tried to do is I broke them up into some similar categories. And I think one of the big misconceptions that always drove me crazy, and you'd even hear PD staff mentioning it, that when you're looking at a budget, they would say, okay, well, 50% of the year's up. So if you spent more than 50%, shame on you, you better fix that, or if you're under, good for you. But really, I think what they fail to recognize is that certain categories are expected, have different spending patterns. For example, insurance premiums, those are all due July 15th, so 100% of that should be spent then. Salaries and benefits, which of course is the largest category, is a little bit different, and what is unique about that is the majority of our employees are 9-month employees, and their first paycheck is in August. So they have, in the first quarter, they have 4 paychecks, or pay periods, 6 the next, 6 the next, and then 8 the last one, because those summer ones that keep the money coming to them over the summer. So it typically is, I have a column here that says what the percent that's historically spent. What I did is also kind of sort these in the categories that are below. Salaries we're doing well in. Historically, at that December 31st, we spent 45%. And what I did, by the way, I looked at the last 3 years, and for most of these categories, it was pretty consistent. And that one especially. So normally we would have spent 45% of our budget, our salary and benefit budget, but we're at 41% now, so we're doing good on that. And that is our largest category, so I think that bodes well for the rest of the year. Some of the others, they're close. The other, I think, That one includes some litigation fees, which I'm sure as you're aware, have been a little bit higher this year than what they've been in the past. And that we probably would discuss at a future meeting on what we could do to try to keep those to a minimum. So, yes, this is based on the second quarter submission that we did to PD. I felt that since that was the one we officially submitted, that was probably the best to use. One thing that seems pretty consistent, we've only had, overall there's 3 reporting categories. There's a 40th, 80th, and 120th. We haven't hit the 120th day, but in comparing what the 40th and 80th day have been, they've been pretty consistent that we've lost about 510 students. What that would translate to would be about $5 million. And how I got that is I just plugged in the same numbers that you see here, except 510 less, and then compared the two. So I let it run through all the multipliers, and the final result is about $5 million. The benefits increase, we haven't gotten final word, but we just estimated 10% on that. That would cost us about $1.65 million. The insurances, we did reach out to NIMSIA, New Mexico Public School Insurance Authority, and they projected that those will increase by 17%. We're trying to mitigate that as much as we can. The property insurance is based on our buildings and our equipment, and we did a pretty thorough review. Every January, they'll send us this huge questionnaire that asks questions about our what property, equipment, and we still have, so that they would cover it with property insurance. They also ask enrollment or staffing for liability and a bunch of other questions. But as of now, we just added 17% to each of those categories, those 4 that are outlined up there. And it comes to about $976,000, so almost $1 million. The estimated negative total, the 7.58 actually includes, and I apologize that it's not up there, there is also some medical, it does, I'm sorry. Originally, we had included the 80-20 shift, but if they do the funding formula correctly and the unit value, that should be worked into the unit value to cover that. And I think one thing that we're hoping on, or we believe is going to be positive for us, since we've been giving more than what we were obligated to give, now we're finally going to get reimbursed for some of that. So we don't know exactly how much yet, and hopefully they figured it all out correctly, and it'll cover it and then some. So we'll have a more firm number once we get all those in. So, you know, that looks like a daunting number for now, but it's pretty early in the process too. There's still a lot that we have yet to uncover. I think the next slide, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Griffin, and she'll go.
And I'll make it short and sweet. Usually when we're looking at declining enrollment and declining revenue, we want to prioritize how we are looking at adjusting the budget and making cuts. And we want to make sure that we have some financial priorities, which include ensuring strong core classroom instruction, supporting and retaining highly qualified educators and staff, upholding our commitment to serve students, responsibly aligning resources with enrollment trends, and investing in proven evidence-based strategies. Next slide. And then Richard, if you want to finish this up.
All right. This is now a finance timeline. Since this is a finance meeting, we thought we would also include some things that are not budget related, but things that you can be seeing coming your way here in the spring. The audit is normally released by now, but for those that don't know, there was a 2-month delay because of, it was right when the shutdown, and there were some other things they had to work out, some directives that they had to provide. So if that holds true, 2 months later would be somewhere in between February and March. We will probably have to schedule a finance subcommittee meeting or two. And we also have up there our targeted May 15th submission date to PD. And also the spring budget workshop is also where we will find out some, hopefully the unit value, maybe some other initiatives, hopefully some allocations from the federal grants, but we'll definitely have some updates once that workshop concludes. And with that, we'll stand for questions.
Touch and leave. Here we go. Okay. Thank you very much for that, and thanks to all of you for your work on this, as well as for your patience with us tonight. Questions from the board as we talk this through? Go ahead.
Thank you, President Noble and Dr. Griffin and staff. This was a lovely overview, very clear and straightforward. Appreciate that. I am curious on page 9, where you have insurance premiums separated from salary and benefits. Like, I'm curious what the other benefits are.
So that's a good question. These insurance premiums are those 4 categories that we're going to
The
go
property
through.
insurance and those.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly, yeah.
Perfect, that makes sense. Not health insurance or dental insurance.
Correct.
Those are in the benefits category. Okay. And it's not part of this, but I'm hoping in a future presentation, we could have some breakdown of like district level staff salaries and school site salaries. And then I think my only other question right now, because I understand I followed the 80-20 really closely. At the last minute last night, we got 1% raises back in the tax package, so.
They were so pissed about that.
Oh, well. I'm happy for our public employees. They definitely deserve that. Because that was gonna be my question. If that didn't end up happening, was there a way with our 80-20 getting reimbursement for that we could make sure that our employees got raises? Because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Vice President. We were actually discussing that, so.
Yeah, good. I'm glad it was on the radar. And it might be, again, depending on what that impact is in the positive side, that maybe there are people that we should give additional raises to. We know that there are places that we have a hard time hiring people. We were very much on the forefront. I think it was 2020 when we first raised the minimum wage of all of our employees to $15 an hour. And that is no longer a living wage, especially in our community. So I think it would be really interesting to dig into that money and figure out how we can allot that for our employees, because they definitely deserve it. And maybe sort of along those lines is that I heard lots of discussions through the session of an SEG adjustment for this year because of that virtual school impact and where that money was moving, and that everyone should be receiving, except for one district, I think, in the whole state, would be receiving additional funds this year.
Yes.
Do we have any idea what that will be or how much it could possibly be?
Board Member Bose, you're correct that there is usually one adjustment per year. I think they are allowed up to 2. Usually around this time, they will send us a revised unit value. It generally gets applied to the same program units, the 21,732 that's in here. The only change to that is it chews up the number of national board certified personnel we have. There's an estimate of that number in this, and we did submit our revised list, and depending on whether that went up or down, that's pretty much the two changes we'll see as a result of that. Some districts who calculated growth may not have that materialize. We unfortunately aren't in that boat, so
Right.
those are usually the three things that would change the
I think that's it for me for now.
That bill passed, that replaced the 35 million?
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay. And I think you just sort of answered this, but there's not really word on an SEG adjustment at this stage. Okay. I mean, it's happened every year, except 1 year in the adjustment, which was last year or the year before, they said, we got it perfect, which Dr. Garcia's head exploded. She was like, nobody ever gets it perfect. How could it have been perfect? But okay, and, you know, if we have other questions and things, I really appreciate this. I wish this had happened my first budget meeting. Just to say, we don't always have to do it in study sessions. We can talk about it, but really we're required to do one finance study session a quarter. We don't need to do our budget in study sessions. We can talk about finance in a regular board meeting. If we want to sit like this, we certainly can. However it works. I think this might be budget number 10 for me on the board, and just to say, the pattern, if it holds, which it may not, because the world's crazy, is that it looks real dire at this point. And, you know, our first budget look, which to me, what is our total operational budget this year? Do you know off the top of your head?
167.
Okay. So it is that number there that's the grand total adjusted budget. Because, yeah, and we can look at, but, you know, $7.58 million is pretty big. And, you know, that's where, when the gap, and what we do in terms of the math, and we've done this before, and I appreciate it, often looks big at this point. And hopefully, you know, honestly, the insurance premiums, they're big numbers. The insurance and risk cost increases compared to what I've been hearing from folks in the private sector, what my own organization has seen. This doesn't even look that bad. 17%, while it's a big hit to us, doesn't look huge in the world of insurance right now. Yeah. You know, the other piece that we've often done, which I think Vice President Bozé, and to some extent we can talk about tonight, or I would say that, you know, the goal for the board tonight is to understand the plan and some of the information we want presented as we go forward, because the timeline only accelerates from here. We have the target date submission, you know, the board, I think, has passed the budget in my time, maybe in May, but never during or after graduation. So sometime by mid to 2/3 through May, we are always done. So, you know, we've never gone into June. I think that would be real nerve-wracking, and we don't want to do that. So in essence, we do have, you know, 2.5 months to work through this, and in that we have spring break and a few other things going on. But ultimately, and again, I think some of Vice President Bozé's questions got us in that arena, which you asked for a breakdown of district and different categories of salaries. Can you just say that again so we're clear on what you're asking for?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I think is helpful for us to understand And again, something that we talk about, I know I talk about with my constituents a lot, is like, if the district is shrinking, are there more admin people? Are we allocating our resources responsibly? And I think that we do a good job. I just think that it's important to talk about it every year so that everyone is on the same page and clear and transparent about as much of that money as possible being focused on the students. And recognizing, of course, what we know is that the people in this room also support student learning, obviously. But just kind of breaking that down into categories so that everyone is on the same page and we can talk honestly about it. Does that sound right?
Board Member Beta, go ahead, I can't make my mic work.
Yeah, and in that same vein, I think we also have to look at schools, the number of schools and buildings, and 509 students, that's a decline from last year. And I think it's probably gonna continue, eventually it will level off, but not only do we maybe have to shrink administration, but we should look at school buildings and facilities. I mean, look at our property insurance we're paying for a bunch of buildings. And I think while the EJ situation was difficult, I think the attitude generally outside of a specific school is that it's okay to start looking at that and talking about and closing schools if that's what we have to do. I think we saw that as part of this, what we went through with EJ and Chaparral. I mean, there was positive editorials about it. The emails that we were receiving from people in the district but outside those specific schools were also like, yeah, this is starting to become kind of common sense. We don't have the population. And then I think we also see the public supports us when we look at our bonding and how well we did with that. And so I think times are changing and we need to start having those tougher discussions, and they might not be as tough as we're thinking because the attitude is changing and the public is recognizing that our enrollment is declining, our population is, and it's not something that's specific to just our district, but it's happening statewide, it's happening nationally. So, yeah, I just, and I also, like the board president Noble said, this was really good, the way it explained from beginning to end, kind of how that the budget starts, where it comes from, and the different categories, and so I appreciate it, and good presentation. So, thank you.
Board Member Blaya.
Thank you, President Noble, Vice President Bose. This is a really cool. Good job. I bring this is really good information. I have a couple of questions. So on page 9, you mentioned at the beginning that you talked a little bit about bars. So we're increasing, and I know it's probably not going to be that significant amount, but when you have to bar something, where do you take it from?
Board Member Blair, normally the bars would refer to allocations that we didn't have at the time the budget was approved. That happens, it's happened quite a bit recently with some of the grant allocations. So we start the year essentially with nothing budgeted. In fact, some federal programs prefer that. They say, you know, we don't want to be rushed getting you an allocation. We'll get that to you. Just put in a budget adjustment request to increase it from the 0 that we submitted to whatever the amount is. Or if there's a true up, sometimes it used to be that some allocations would give you 90% of the prior year allocation, and then once it becomes finalized, there'll be a budget adjustment request to true it up to the final actual amount.
So when there's a deficit of 43%, you got to take it from somewhere, right?
Are you referring?
So page 9.
Page 9.
Other.
And if I may,
yes.
those are, it's detailed in the bar because it does have to come from somewhere. So
Okay,
we
so-
can't necessarily say it'll come from salary
find
and
a-
benefits right now,
Gotcha.
but in
I
any
see.
bars we approve, it does
Okay, so it'll say.
detail the source of where money is being moved from in order to true up our litigation fees,
And
for
we have,
example.
and we have reserves.
Yes, we do have reserves.
Okay. And then I do have, on page 10, and to Member Abeta's statement, this projected loss of 509 students. I understand that's a projection. I get it. Like you did all your thing, that's what we did, and we lost as many students, and this is what it's going to be. But I think when as we go through this process, I think it's important that we look at why these 509 students have left the district. Because I've gotten beat up over the last 2 weeks by people, just really upset with not necessarily decisions that we've made, but about the processes and about different things that happen here within the district. And they're leaving the district because lack of responsiveness has been one of the biggest kind of concerns, is that, when there's questions about things, they send these questions in and they don't always get a response. Not that they don't get the response that they like, it's that they don't get a response at all. So they're just saying, well, I'm pretty much sick of Rio Rancho because I keep hearing how great Rio Rancho is. And, it's frustrating because why, as we're building this budget, to go to my last question, because we talk about the page 11 priorities, I think if we can make the priorities, and actually say we're going to hit these priorities, because these are really good priorities, but say we're going to have objectives and we're going to have these things to hit these priorities through the budget. Now I understand the budget's fixed, a lot of this stuff is fixed, where there's not a lot of wiggle room. But if we can this is like marketing and sales type stuff, say this is what we're looking at doing, and saying maybe we could keep our students and say Santa Fe is better than Rio Rancho, right? Like, I just want to say that as part of this. I don't accept that we have to just lose students. I don't think I'll ever accept it. And then, I'm sorry, just one last question.
I just want to
Okay.
address the students. I'm not sure that we've lost those students, or they just haven't come. People aren't having kids anymore.
No, that's not true.
So that's part of it.
No, I simply do not believe that, because I have had conversations with at least 15 people in the last 2 weeks that have pulled their kids out of Carlos Gilbert, and have pulled their kids, they went to Little Earth instead of Carlos Gilbert. They pulled their kids out of, well, unfortunately, EJ. I know 2 families that actually moved to Rio Rancho. So I get it. Birth rate is an issue, but that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing people leaving the district explicitly. And so I agree with you, but that's not what I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to people that have told me explicitly that they pulled their kids out because they just can't take it anymore. And so that's a reality. And so my last question is, as you said at the beginning, that as we go through this process, you'll give it to the board to kind of come up with our kind of ideas and whatever it is. This is a question to the board, because I don't know. Do we, as a group, come up with what these things should be, or do we do it individually?
So we need to act as a board. And we only adopt the budget as a board. We are each 20% of a thing, but we only have power as a majority. So it absolutely takes 3 of us. I think your question is about priorities. When you
Yeah,
say
I guess
these
so,
things.
Yeah. That's what you're.
So that's what I was sort of going to say is there's basically 2 categories that I would like to see us flesh out as much as possible tonight, and we can certainly keep it as a board discussion item on the agenda forever, whether we're doing the budget or not. But it's information we want to see, because, let's not just on the last meeting or on the meeting when we're supposed to adopt the budget, send them away with hours and hours of work of numbers to generate for us. So let's think about the information we want to see and our priorities. And that's always been a thing that we do, how we talk about board priorities. I think social emotional wellness has been something that we've stated as a priority for a number of years. The sooner we can get to and really agree those in however concrete a way, because, there's the sort of generalization to a specific thing that I heard Board Member or Vice President Bozé bring up of hard areas to hire, I think it's a good thing to talk about where we might need to target pay raises, that sort of thing. If we think about alignment to priorities, but ultimately, right now is a real good time to talk about them, to put them on a list. We can design the process together if we need to end up voting on them, because there's interplay, of course, with the work that the team does as to, you know, if we say we want to give everybody 50% raises, we might not be able to do that. It might not work with the math. So we can say that, but of course we have to have reasonable interplay, you know, and if we want to ask them, go cost out 75 or 50% raises, sorry, I just went up. Everybody gets 75% raise. You know, and then they can come back and tell us that's going to cost, I mean, we could have an estimate right now of that. And then, you know, I would think we would have to come back to earth and say, okay, we need to be more targeted in what we're looking for and we're asking for. But this is the interplay and, you know, why we want to start now in terms of making a list of priorities and information we want. And the more we do it now, the sooner we do it, the better it will be by the end. Go ahead.
Thank you. So with the declined enrollment, I'm sure you can get us information pretty easily as to, of the 509, how many left the district? How much of the 509? Is it 200 students that we lost? Is it 500? Is it 50? And then how does that compare to the state average or national average? Is it something that we're because, right, I get the same emails and calls from parents too that are upset because they took their kid out or transferred their kid. And so it would be, I'm sure we can, right? We can break down that 509 and you can tell us what is it, how much it is attributed to decline in birth rate and how much is people just leaving because of the district. Because I think both my colleagues are right, but it'd be nice to see what of the 509.
We can probably do that over
We lose a lot of students going to middle school.
I think,
So, yeah, that info would be helpful though, because then.
yeah, I think where it would also be helpful is where they are, because I think the biggest fear of mine is obviously if it does materialize is that's about how many classrooms we have, and if we lose one student for every classroom, there's really not much you could do to fix that. You know, if they're concentrated, and that's to your point about how many facilities we have, the more spread out they are, the harder it is to adjust to them. If they were like 10 in one school, that might, you know, be something you could work with. But yeah, we could, these numbers are basically last year's 40th day minus this year's 40th day, last year's 80th day minus this year, and both of them were very consistent. One was like 508 and the other one was 510 maybe. I mean, they were within two,
But we don't know how many of those, like if 200 of the 508 left the district because they were dissatisfied with what they were getting, how many are just natural from that, you know, birth rates declining?
And there could be some like withdrawal data that.
Because they do tell us when they leave, right? They don't just.
Yeah.
But the birth rate wouldn't be effective of those type of terms, right? No. Because this is year over year comparison.
kindergarten would maybe show
kindergarten, sure.
would show that trend data. Beata, did you want to share something about what we could share?
Yes, so Madam President, Superintendent Griffin, members of the board, what we can produce pretty readily is we can look to see when students exit. I can work with the public education department to see if they re-register in another public school. So that we can determine pretty easily. So we can determine if they went to another district, if they went to a public charter. What is more difficult to get is if they go to private schools because they don't report to the same central system, or if they left the state. We can pull some of that information from sort of exit comments when folks withdraw students. It may or may not be 100% accurate, but we can get you some pretty good estimates of if students are leaving us to go to different public institutions, how many are they, and are there locuses where they go? But that is
Or locuses where they come from. I think that would be
Correct.
great.
correct.
Because board member Leah's right. If we have a problem if a lot of people are leaving because they don't like the district or what, so we need to know that, I would think. Thank you. Board
Yeah,
President.
I think that's a great one, and I really do appreciate, Richard, your point about where are they? Is it one per classroom, or is it concentrated in districts? Because, and I think, we certainly might know statewide birth rates, national birth rates, we can know the trends. I suspect that it has a lot to do with our cost of living, which has to do with our cost of housing, because if you have families that have means to shift to private, which I heard is going to be harder for us to know unless we have anecdotal comments and that sort of thing. But I would say that's a trend I've been seeing, is that, just the affordability of Santa Fe is changing over time for families. And so birth rate may be part of it, but I have a very strong suspicion it has a lot to do with our affordability. I mean, that's what forever and ever has been the draw of Rio Rancho in part. I mean, there's good schools and more affordable housing, or housing that is more affordable to people who have jobs, and, and we are seeing, I think, an influx of folks with remote work with, salaries that aren't necessarily prevailing wages of local jobs here, because you can be here from Silicon Valley and draw that kind of thing, in which case, private school tuition is not a big deal if so all of that. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
So one of the schools I represent tells me that they are a prep school for kids going into prep schools. Mm-hmm. You probably know which one it is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Most of the kids that go to Wood Gormley, many of them, then go on to private schools.
Mm-hmm. And in my experience, people are more inclined to tell you when they're upset than they are when, although I have heard over the years many encouraging stories, particularly about our high schools, both Santa Fe High and Capitol, and that people who have left for middle school, they come back for the medical pathway at Capitol, they come back for various different things, including just the diversity of electives at Santa Fe High, various, so that those encouraging stories are out there too. And yeah, go ahead.
So thank you for saying that, President Noble, because that's kind of what I'm talking about as we talk about the stuff on the cool page that has the priority, page 11. Like, as we talk about some of these things, that's kind of what I'm talking about, is, it's a good district. There's a lot of great offerings. There's a lot of pluses. Yes, there's some struggles right now because 48-year-old average age of buildings, that's a problem, and it's going to have all kinds of trickle effects. But the reality is that, like this whole, that's a really troubling number to show that our legal liability has increased by 43%. That's these are the kinds of things that the public hears and is like, come on, guys, like, that money should be going to the students, not to legal cases. And those are the kinds of things that if we could put the stuff on page 11 and the stuff that you just spoke to, get that out there and say, look, this is what we're doing. Santa Fe Public Schools is a real option. It's a viable option. That's kind of what I'm saying as we kind of talk about this.
Go ahead, Vice President Bose.
I think one of the other things, because I do, you and I both have kids in high school, and we think about social emotional wellness a lot. And I've sort of tried to broaden my thinking around that in the last few months. And I became curious, what happened to community schools? Because when I joined the board, that's what it was all about. And people send me articles and I always read them, and I think especially the way that ties into economic insecurity that we're having in our communities right now, as well as all of the emotional stress that many of us are experiencing, that I wonder if we could allocate resources a little bit better to support community schools and kind of build on that, which we were doing when I joined the board.
Board President Noble.
Go ahead.
Maybe not as part of this process, the budgeting process, but on slide 4, when we talk about athletics and activity funds, it seems like I've been getting a lot of calls lately for people wanting to use our facilities. And as I'm looking into it, before I got on the board, you hear the loud people saying, we don't make our facilities accessible to people. It seems like we're making it almost maybe too accessible, and there's such a demand. And maybe at some point, eventually I'd like to see a report about how our facilities are being used, because I think they're being used way more than the public gives us credit for. And 2, maybe we need to look at generating more revenue I know we're pretty generous with those that do get to use our facilities, and maybe we need to look at that again, and we could generate more income, and by all means, prioritize them to Santa Fe Public School students, because I think there's, again, the calls I'm getting, I'm kind of like, well, wait a minute, those aren't students using our facility, or those aren't, so at some point I would like to take a look at that.
I think that's really worthwhile, and superintendent, and team, as you all think about this, it's, we did a study session on it one time, a long time ago, and I came to exactly that conclusion, like, wow, I had no idea how much use these things were getting, and, I do think it's a little bit important to figure out. And on this slide, just to say, as part of the budget, we almost only have discretion in the operational budget. Everything else is pretty determined. I mean, that's the way I've always thought of it, and truly having created the mental trick that the operational budget is smaller because it has fewer letters than the operating budget has stayed with me for a lot of years, but that's where the SEG money goes. That's where our discretion is. The other stuff is pretty much, special revenue is all grants written for specific things. We can't say, give everybody 50% raises with special revenue funds. We just can't. So the operational budget is where our flex is, and it's pretty small given that more than 80% is already in staffing. So again, we can maybe get targeted. And just to also say, gosh, I'm going to try not to be a grumpy old lady all the time, but we did a whole project one time about how we could basically bring in revenue in various different places. And I don't think we looked at the facilities in the way that you're suggesting. It was striking for how little room there seemed to be, how it didn't bear a lot of fruit to go out there and look for revenue, because I was ready to, rent out parcels of land and various different things. In the end, if there is a budget gap, that does become part of the solution as to where we look to bridge that gap. In the past, it has almost always been sales of real estate. Which of course is finite over a period of time, but when I first got on the board, there was various different payments coming in because of, and then we sold Alvord, so there was one whole budget year where we allocated priorities according to the money from the proceeds of the sale of the Alvord property. And community schools, I mean, I don't think we've stopped. I really hope not. It is my understanding we have continued in various different ways to pursue community schools. Sometimes that involves, of course, communities in schools. There's specific nonprofits. Sometimes it involves grants from the state for some particular sites. Vanessa will remember all those. Okay. And how we, I guess my question for you, Vice President Bose, as ever with everybody, is like, can we narrow that? What is the particular request? Is it how it could work better? I mean, I agree with you, because integrating community resources and continuing to push the idea of community schools and that integration feels like one of the highest leverage things we can do for students and families. But in terms of our budget process, I wonder if there's an ask there or specifics. We used to see the number for the communities in schools contract, but again, I don't think that was an entirely accurate picture, because we have the community schools themselves.
Right.
President and Vice President, may I just, this was one of my big learning points coming here because of community schools versus community in schools. And so community schools originally, and please, I was going to say, Dr. Vanessa Romero, please speak up if I'm misspoken, but we had originally a grant for 7 of our schools for doing the community schools model. And that creates a liaison, a person at that site that really invests in the community and brings the community in to provide supports. It's an incredible model. I haven't seen it done before. That money has dried up over the years, but we still continue to do the 7 schools. Is that correct? Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I do remember some of those grants changing at some point, and I wasn't sure that we had maintained the funding without the grants. So that's great to hear. So maybe just kind of an update, and if there's room for expansion, or if there are other schools that have needs where we could replicate what we have at those 7 schools, and what the budget impact would be on that. Does that sound right?
That sounds right, yeah, and I think that, I mean, the piece you said that, but I'll just frame it a little differently, and you can disagree, but it's like the recommendations of, where we could get high leverage there. Board Member Blaya?
Thank you, President Noble. Just, can I ask Vice President Bose, what is community school? Like, what is that? Just high level. Just like
It's wraparound services and resources for at-need or at-risk students, so it could include tying them and their families to social work or therapy, or getting them food, and just different resources from the community, so they have a liaison that can outreach to the community to get those resources. The difference with community in schools is that they're very focused on, they have a caseload. So if the students don't fall within certain categories, they won't help others. I mean, of course they will, they'll help them, but they won't provide wraparound services to all the kids. Where community schools, grants, and liaisons, it doesn't matter who walks into the school or who needs support.
Okay, so follow-up question, who measures those programs?
Community in schools
No, the
has their own,
community schools.
we have Crystal Ibata, who oversees and manages and supports all of our community schools.
And then the next question I have, okay.
So I was just gonna add that when I joined the board, of course, Dr. Garcia was the superintendent, and she, instilled the pillars of community schools, and I memorized them and could recite them at that point, but, that was before COVID and a long time ago, it feels like. So there are really specific things that are outlined as part of what a community school does and provides, that are those wraparound services, and creating really stronger communities with the parents and the families. I've been to schools, and they'll have a classroom or a closet where they have a food pantry, and jackets and clothes all the time where kids can just stop by. And that's just one little tiny piece of the way that they meet student needs, sending bags of food home on the weekend, but also connecting them to rent assistance, you know, car funds, you name it, that the school becomes a resource for families and students for all of their needs, and connecting them with various supports in the community as well.
See, and that's another, you know, high point of the Santa Fe Public Schools. That's, you know, agent of change within the community to try to make Santa Fe, you know, a stronger place. And I mean, I didn't know that, right? So, I mean, I bet you a bunch of people don't know that. So, I mean, that's kind of everything. And then to about page 11 again, our priorities page. Can we ask for how on any of this stuff, or not really? Or is the how out of our scope? So for example, safeguarding strong core classroom instruction with a continued emphasis on early leadership foundational. So that's the what. Can we ask what the how is?
Yes, you can. So that would mean that we're ensuring that our classroom teachers, that we have enough classroom teachers for our student ratios and the right type of qualifications for those students.
Okay.
Prioritizing that.
Well, how do we do the emphasis on early literacy? Like, is there like a specific program that gets implemented?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
We also get funding from the grant, and so we have coordinators in our department in teaching and learning, and so they work with our pre-K programs, early childhood centers, so there's resources for families.
Thank you.
I think it might be good at our next discussion of this, if we can see as close to sort of the format of the budget we'll be adopting. Because when we see the operational and the staffing and the various different things, it's come in different forms, but it is, for questions like this, and I think it is, I don't know how to frame exactly what I'm saying, but not super specific. You know, you don't see an early literacy line item. So, and this is often the art and science of how we understand priorities, and again, connection to the budget, which is the exercise, and of course it, and I like there was a thing here that says, but something about what a budget is.
Yes, budget is where strategy becomes action.
There we go, where strategy becomes action, and so how we see that specifically, you know, to see it sooner rather than later, so we can start drawing these connections, I think is helpful, because yeah, and again, some of that, it may be in grants. Certainly there was one year, somebody may remember this, but I think it was the Alvord money, we did a special emphasis on early literacy out of special money, where we allocated it, and it was early literacy. It was reading by the end of first grade, I remember, and Steve Correa was on the board.
That means none of us were here.
It does mean none of you were here, but ultimately, yeah.
Well, and along those lines, I think there was a year where we saw that kind of overall budget spreadsheet-looking thing, and there were items that were color-coded to our priorities, which isn't to say that was the only place it was or that's all it was. It was places where those priorities showed up in the budget so that we could track that a little bit. You know, we talk about art and music. So like where does that show up in the budget? And I think that that's a really helpful exercise for all of us to have the ability to see where our priorities are in those buckets, because they're not specific line items all the time.
There is, in the long chart of accounts that we have, there are some program codes that have specifically for those type of programs. So, and there's report writers in the system where we could have it sort and subtotal by those, so you could, and you could configure those any way you want. If you want it by function, which is like, classroom or admin or so forth, and so there's a lot of ways we could configure the same number and present it in different ways, so.
And this is why I do want us to get clear, because we're not going to go through the whole chart of accounts. I mean, we could, I suppose, try that in a board meeting, but. Yeah.
Short answer is it's fine.
Yeah, go ahead, Board Member Bland.
So first of all, I really like slogans, because they could really give you kind of like a guiding kind of action, right? So I dig it. So the budget is where strategy becomes action. So the question I have for the board is, are we going to do a strategic planning session as part of this? Or like ahead of this? Or do we not do that? Or there's never going to be a strategic planning session and they should just forget about the idea?
No, we need to update our strategic plan. We absolutely do. I guess I would say, and the budget we should be thinking about our strategic plan and our priorities, but this is our budget. This is next year's operating budget that we need to adopt. And adopting what I would hope is a multi-year strategic plan is, I don't think we can do a strategic plan right now before the budget. But to me, it's sort of all the same thing as we talk about it.
Well, and I guess that's kind of the question, is because if we keep saying, well, we're going to do the budget for next year and we'll get to the strategic plan, then it's always kind of like this rolling kind of, we're on a year-to-year basis. And I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that part of like the way that I feel about things and what I've seen so far is that, I kind of sense a lack of cohesion overall. And I'm sorry, but I do. I feel like there has been a lack of cohesion, not up until this point, not with the school board, but with everything in general. And it's this lack of cohesion within not only just our district, but within the community as a whole, that the more we continue to be reactive to these numbers and the more that we continue to be reactive, we're not actually building a foundation and a fabric of certain things. Like community and school sounds like a great thing, but it's a grant, so it's not really woven into the fabric of the district. So these are the kinds of things that, I don't understand how we can say we don't have a strategic plan, but we're going to just do the budget first and then we'll get to it. I just don't understand that. I'm sorry.
I mean, you're welcome to make suggestions at any given point.
Well, I'd like to suggest that we do a strategic planning session. And I think that we talk about what we're trying to do as a district. I mean, I've been talking about quantum computing for a really long time, and I have a draft of a resolution that Sandia National Labs and Los Alamos National Labs have helped me. I've actually sent it to the governor's office for Alex Greenberg's review. I mean, I know they're not going to do it right now or anytime within the next few weeks, but it's this type of STEAM education that, if we weave that into the fabric of our schools, our curriculum, or give these opportunities, we could then find funding for it. But if we don't do those kinds of things, then we can't do anything because we're just using what we already know instead of thinking of how can we find other funding to do other programs. And if we don't have a strategic planning session that says, here's where we're going to be, here's how we're going to do this over the next 3 years, 3 to 5 years, then how do we do that? See, so I would like to suggest, since I can make a suggestion, that we do a strategic planning session soon. Because there's a lot of open questions that we do have to talk about as a school board that are just kind of languishing, in my opinion. Very specific things that I can't mention here, but I do think we have to get to some very specific things very soon.
You can mention them here.
I don't think I can,
Okay.
President Noble.
I mean, a strategic planning session, and we can talk about this. I'm happy to talk to you if you want. I don't think a strategic planning session where we sit here for a few hours gets us to a multi-year strategic plan. You may disagree. I have never done a strategic planning session that results in a multi-year strategic plan that is successful, and I believe that in the Santa Fe Public Schools we need to engage constituents to do a successful strategic plan. That us sitting here and talking amongst ourselves is not going to get us that far, but you and I may disagree on how this can go. I'm certainly happy to talk about it. We can do a session. We'll get to our advanced planning. We do have limited time, and we are mandated to do a budget by the time we need to do this. And you know, I think I heard, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, community schools is not a grant anymore. It is embedded.
Oh, it is embedded.
In the fabric of our
I missed
schools.
that, I'm
It is a philosophy that you can Google and read a lot about the pillars. There is dissertations, many of them, that have been built on this philosophy. I think Deputy Superintendent Romero's definition was strikingly good and concise about wraparound services. But again, there's a lot of deep philosophical underpinning that a lot of people in this district have thought a lot about. And things may feel disconnected and unintentional. It has been my strong experience in my time on the board that often there is a lack of knowledge, and these perceptions, for lots of reasons, may be out there and may be perceived by us, but when you push into the system, the depth of what's going on here, including just our example tonight of what is happening in our facilities has been more than expected. That has been my experience, almost bar none, in everything we want to push into. So, you know, how we do this work without making the staff crazy, because they do also basically are all supposed to work about 40 hours a week, and bring cohesion to ourselves as a board is to me part of the question, how we stay strategic and on track. And it doesn't mean that we can't talk about all sorts of things, but it does mean we need some guardrails and even discipline in, you know, keeping everybody sane in terms of what we are doing. So, you know, again, I'm happy to talk about a strategic planning session. We can look at when it might work, but to me, I don't know that what you're asking for in terms of community cohesion and a multi-year plan in order to do a fairly specific budget is realistic. Go ahead.
In December at the annual NMSBA conference, I went to a strategic planning session because I know that it's something that we talk about, that it's kind of on our radar. And I listened to a presentation from a consultant, and I believe it was with Pewaukee Schools, and they were talking about this like rocket speed strategic plan that they had done, and it was 4 months. So it's not a one session kind of thing.
But I'm sorry, if I could clarify. I'm not saying we're gonna sit down in a room and come up with a plan. But like to President Noble's point about engaging, you know, the community. Well, we don't even have a plan to have a plan. Like, we don't have like anything. The 4 months is like, you know, but we don't even have like, this is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna do it, this is the end game. And okay, we could divorce it from this current budget process, but there is a couple of things to me that we need to address quickly, and we haven't addressed it, and I have yet to hear when we're going to address these things.
I'd like to ask you to get specific. I mean, this sort of generalization of we don't have stuff happening or on the calendar. I mean, I think we have a pretty good plan here to get to a budget process, which does include, and we sort of brushed over it, but this has always been an important piece for me in the budget, meeting with departments and schools and departments. We've spent a lot of time in previous budgets talking about SACs, right? School advisory committees, councils, whatever we call them, but how we engage at school sites to make sure, and Richard talked a little bit about the discretionary funds, but that we have priorities, and you know, that is the job of the team. They get out there and they do conversations, and again, there's a lot to it. So,
And that's
you know,
family engagement. That's not just school staff. Those are parents and families talking with school staff and district level admin about that discretionary fund.
Yeah, and so we could talk about it, but I would like to challenge you rather frankly than throwing out some vague dissatisfaction.
Well, it's not dissatisfaction, it's frustration. The reality is.
If I could finish, please.
Sure.
Write down what you want. If you want a strategic planning session, I will work with you on how to frame that. You've probably done a lot of this, as have I. There's a lot of different ways, and it can go a million places. But you know, I would just ask, as we work to be a productive board, to bring forward the specifics of what you would like to suggest happen. And, you know, I'm happy to work with that and work with the superintendent and try and do this. But, you know, to say that we don't even have a plan to have a plan, I just disagree with. I mean, we've been working on a lot of things very intentionally for a long time. And, you know, doing a strategic plan and updating the strategic plan is something that we moved towards pretty intentionally in the last few years before we had a superintendent resign a year ago in February 2025. There have been a few other things going on, including a budget that we had to do last year, a hiring process, and onboarding a new superintendent. So, you know, well, and then a whole thing with a school issue. But, you know, again, I just, show me what that looks like. Let's talk about it. If you can bring forward ideas concretely of what to do, let's talk about it and do it within the parameters of the reality of the time we have, the staff, and what we're asking of everyone. And please, go ahead.
President Noble and Vice President Bose, we have one employee, and we have not done an evaluation and discussed our one employee. I've been here now, we're already at the end of February, we're coming up on March. And I don't think it's fair to our district, to our staff, I don't think it's fair to our community that we have not done this yet.
It's scheduled for the next meeting.
Okay, well, I didn't know that. I haven't seen that yet.
Well, you wouldn't have seen the agenda. I mean, this is part of the privilege of being the board president, and we can talk about that process. It's not on our agenda tonight, and we need to be careful what we do in an open meeting. But again, there are, and we did cancel one meeting in February. There are time constraints, and, you know, I don't know. I mean, we're doing the best we can. I am doing the best I can, and I would appreciate if you want to say these things and make suggestions proactively ahead of time. We do need to publish agendas 72 hours ahead of time. We have established with the superintendent's leadership a process where the board gets to review and bring up issues for the agenda ahead of it being published. So, you know, let's get proactive about what we need to happen, because truly everything everywhere all at once has never been something in my experience that the board can execute on.
Go ahead.
I just want, I would like to acknowledge what a tricky thing it is to come in January, because we are kind of midway through our yearly process of doing things, and we had the benefit of sitting together in July or early August, and we had our board retreat, and we talked about our cadence in the year, and those of us that have been here know that by the end of February we do our superintendent evaluation. Like, it's not past due, it's when we do it. But you have no way of knowing that because you weren't here. And so I want to acknowledge that that's a tricky situation for you to be in. We don't do a lot of stuff in the spring because the budget takes up so much energy. We do superintendent evaluation, we spend months digging into budget, and there, you know, there's a little bit of time where it's like, what's the next thing we're going to do? And I think it's really reasonable to say it's important. I think we're all in agreement. It's important to do a strategic plan. So let's work on getting that scheduled to start that work.
Right.
Go ahead, Representative Bates.
President Noble, yeah, and I think also, this really is part of the strategic plan, evaluating the superintendent is, and then the superintendent, in order to do a strategic plan, we have to hear from the superintendent what she's observed over the last year. And based on her experience other places and here, what should a strategic plan look like? Because I read a long time ago that your CEO, your superintendent, that's your strategic planner, really. Board members come and go. We could be here today, gone tomorrow, and it's really your superintendent that keeps it going. And when I look at the budget, this really is the beginning of your strategic plan. The 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the how is your strategic plan.
Correct.
And so I think the pieces are all coming together. But I think we need to be a little patient because we do have a new superintendent. We seemed like we were on a pretty solid track with the previous superintendent, and things, you can start seeing things coming together. We're making progress, and then we had that disruption. And so I think we do need to get the superintendent's evaluation done. That is something that we can say during the evaluation is, okay, we want to work on a strategic plan, but we want to hear what your thoughts and your ideas, and then we'll give you ours, because I'm sure we all have a different idea of what a strategic plan should be and look like from our different experiences. So, but at the end of the day, it's really the superintendent, I think, that has to lead that and say, okay, I hear what you guys are saying, and I know I value your experience and what you think it is, but from a superintendent's perspective, this is what it needs to look like. But I think a lot of the pieces are there. I think it's a matter, and the reimagining process, that's a foundation for a strategic plan too. So I think we didn't not do anything the last few years. I think, but I think things are coming to a head with declining enrollment, the school situation, and I agree, we should work on a strategic plan.
I don't mean at all to disparage the work of the board. That's not my point. That is not at all the goal. I know that this board has had some very challenging issues arise, especially in the last 18 months. And I realize that that there has been a lot of work done. I would never disparage the board or say that the board hasn't done. I think that you guys did a great job in finding the superintendent. I thought that process was on point. I mean, my personal opinion, and I shared that from the podium, I thought you guys did a great job. I thought the community engagement was fantastic. I thought that was like a template for how to do things within the community. I've talked with various city councilors about that because I thought it was a really cool way to engage people. So I know that the board has done a lot of work. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, nothing has been done and it's so stupid. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is what I'm experiencing since I started, there's still a little bit of catch up that has to do, so I get it, but I kind of feel like I only have, I have now less than 4 years to try to figure something out in our community, and time is ticking. I have a limited time here. And so that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the board hasn't done anything. I'm saying that I'd like to do something while I'm here.
Well, and I think one of the tricky things is understanding and learning what school board members' role is and our responsibility. Because I've been on the city council and I've been on school board, and this isn't the same thing. We're not paid. We don't have committees. We don't have, and so a lot of times you don't feel like you don't have the ability, or the system isn't in place for us to accomplish a lot of things because we're just not empowered as school board members to do that. We really aren't. That's why we have a superintendent and an administration. And the state set that up for a reason, I guess. They don't want school boards to look like city councils or county commissions. They want, and maybe because the thinking is because you're dealing with children and their education, and maybe I'm putting myself down as an elected official, but they don't want elected officials getting too deep in the weeds when it comes to our children's education, because at the end of the day, we're not vetted other than going and signing up, putting our name on a ballot, and then you become a superintendent. And that could, and you can see in different districts around the country where that's kind of dangerous, because then you do get the crazy parent who has, you know, about whatever their personal philosophy is, or right or left, and then they start trying to drive education. And so we might just not, we as school board members, we're not city councilors, we're not county commissioners, and we don't have as much authority as we think, unfortunately. And we don't have committees, we just don't have the same structure, and sometimes that's frustrating as a school board member, but that's the system we're down
Kind of
with.
do have committees.
We do, but not to the point where we can drive real, like, just,
Yeah, they don't, yeah. I
we
understand
just
what-
don't.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was something I had to learn when I came here, that this isn't the city council. We don't have that kind of authority, and we don't, unfortunately.
Well, the only thing I'll say about that, Member Bates, and I know your perspective is very different than mine, because you were on city council and you were county manager, and you had a lot of high-level experience that I don't have. So I respect that. However, I've been here, this is what, like my third meeting maybe? And we've already made a bunch of decisions that have affected a lot of people's lives. So maybe we don't have authority, but we have a lot of responsibility. And I think that responsibility has been an adjustment for me, to be honest. And so because we have a lot of responsibility, that's not lost on me, and it never will be. And if I ever get to a day when I walk into this room and the responsibility of what we're deciding here, or in that room over there, if I ever think that I don't have the authority to assume that responsibility, then I should resign.
Well, I just think it's a fine line, and we have to be careful as school board members to, I mean, it's not defined right anywhere, and I think that's why I try to always bring us back to the superintendent and the administration. And, but I don't disagree. I think we do need a strategic plan. I think if we get through the evaluation of the superintendent, that's something we put on as an objective for this next year. I think a lot of the pieces are in place for a strategic plan, and hopefully through that process, we will all be able to talk about our priorities and the things that we want to accomplish over the next 4 years, and for some of us 2 years, because that's when our terms are up. So.
I appreciate that, and I agree. We have a lot of the pieces in place, and you know, I think that was very well said. And the budget is part of it, and reimagining was meant to be the foundation of a strategic plan. And, you know, I do hope we can revisit that very intentional process, which was designed to be intentional, strengths-based, and really looking at what we need to do to something you said, Board Member Blea, a little while ago, of let's not just accept declining enrollment. Let's challenge that reality and see what we can do to really enhance, unpack, and be entirely better about the incredible assets in the Santa Fe Public Schools that, you know, and we got a grant at the end of that. I know I've said this a few times, but to market our middle schools, because that was something that came out, and truly in our budget process, nobody ever wants to see a giant marketing line item, right? It's just, we want to keep our money focused on serving the students, and, you know, I mean, it's something we could consider, but that has been the judgment of previous boards and previous budgets, is we're not going to spend a lot of money on marketing, and so it was great that we had, you know, philanthropic partners ready to step up and say, we want to support that because it's something that is important, and, you know, isn't that marketing, advertising, slick campaigns is not necessarily embedded in district operations and district budgets. So that's been a balance, but how we talk about it, how we unpack, how we make sure that we are letting people know all of the incredible advantages that we have in the Santa Fe Public Schools. So there's a decent list, not comprehensively. Vice President Bozé, I think, had a good sort of breakdown of staffing costs, administration to different types of staff, looking at priorities in terms of hiring, where we might have hard to fill positions, there we go. And looking at prioritizing that. Board Member Abeta talked about school buildings and facility uses, and seeing that sort of geographic distribution of our resources. We talked about a breakdown of the 509 students, as best we can understand why they're leaving, where they've gone, who they are, where they are. Community schools, I think we did get there, which was sort of the recommendations of leverage on community schools. I also wrote down reimagining as the foundation of our strategic plan, but I don't think that was a budget priority. Key pieces I missed there on what we're asking for and or prioritizing at this stage. I would like to invite every board member to, I hope this is all right. You can slap me with a gavel or something. But, because we need to talk about this as a board together, obviously in open session, but if you have particular ideas and thoughts as to other information you'd want, share it with the superintendent. Just as we did with the E.J. Martinez and Chaparral conversation, I think that worked. We ended up with a binder of incredible data and information, which I think was a compendium of what board members had sort of asked for. So, in a similar way, as we go away and think about this, if you have specific thoughts and asks, I would say everybody, ideally sooner rather than later, share your thoughts with the superintendent so that she can get the team working and we can wrestle with things with that. Anything else on this before we move on? All right, well, good philosophical discussion. Thank you all. Moving on to advanced planning. We have a Partners in Ed, and then we should be a week away. We will have an executive session. My thinking and hope is that we, given the conversation tonight, and that we have not heretofore asked the superintendent to prepare anything for the evaluation, we will do it in two segments, which I would say it will start with our executive session next week, and then continue on March 12th. In the meantime, there is also the National School Boards Association in San Antonio, which is why we don't have a March 9th meeting, we discovered. That's in April. Okay, never mind.
2 in March.
2 in March. Okay, so that is the right one. I'm getting my dates wrong. All right. So then we have the 12th, which will come quickly after next week's meeting. And again, let's plan on executive sessions for both of those to work on our superintendent evaluation. And then there's a note on the 16th about hosting the New Mexico School Board Association Region 2 meeting. That is not a public meeting, correct? That is an NMSBA event that we are hosting.
It's my fault. I offered Santa Fe.
I think it'll be fun.
It is great. Where is it?
It's going to be at Santa Fe High School in the Commons area.
Anything else on advanced planning? Yes.
President Noble, I just wanted to also note, mostly for the board to know that the Housing Task Force is meeting for the first time next week. Next
Thank you.
Tuesday. Yeah.
Thank you. And those, okay, yeah.
It's not an official meeting.
It's not an official meeting, it's a task force.
I'm updating.
It's an update. Okay. Anything else on advanced planning? All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.